Hey everyone, welcome back to 996 The Howl. Utah is one game away from the trade deadline next Friday. They got a big long break, about 4 days off before a back-to-back between Detroit Thursday night, and they play on trade deadline day as well, Friday night against Chicago. I know from a Coyotes perspective, I've always been in the shoes of those Chicago Blackhawks playing a game the day of the trade deadline after you're selling off a lot of assets. I remember maybe 2 seasons ago or maybe last season, but I do believe it was 2 seasons ago after trading Chikrin and Goss to spare, Carolina came into town and just completely dominated the game. The morale was down in the locker room, just dejection around the team, and they didn't really play good. So hopefully Utah could catch Chicago on that other side of it and pick up a win next Friday. But yes, the trade deadline, I usually do these videos the week of the deadline because you never know what position the team is going to be. Right now, after the loss against New Jersey, they went 3 wins, 1 loss on that 4-game road home stand, which my expectation was to get 3 out of 4 wins. So great job by Utah. An unfortunate result against New Jersey, but they're still in the hunt. They're in a great position, which leads to Utah not really being a seller and not really being a buyer either. They're not solidified yet in the playoffs to make a big push and splash to buy. So here, this is all my opinion. This is not, nothing is factual with trades, but for me, the selling options are Matias Maccelli, Nick Bukestad, and Michael Carcone. I feel like these 3 players you could remove out of the lineup and not sort of disrupt the trajectory of the team. I also have the UFAs, usually a team where they're not sort of in a playoff spot for sure on a trade deadline. They'll trade off their unrestricted free agents because those players are likely just to walk away and you lose them for nothing. So you want to recoup some assets if you're not going to sign them to a contract. I strongly believe they'll sign Vejmelka to a contract in the summer, but for the rest, if you trade Oli Mata, that's a huge disruption. Ian Cole, that's a huge disruption as well. Kerfoot, I thought about it. Should he be a selling option? But he's way too versatile. He touches so many areas of the ice. Face-offs, penalty killing. He could play in your top line in the center position, like when Cooley was injured. He could play right now in your second line with Hayden and Gunther, now that Carcone's battling with a day-to-day injury, or he could be on the fourth line with Stenlund and Bukestad and O'Brien sits out. So he touches way too many areas. Although he is an unrestricted free agent and it would be good business to sell him off for some assets, he would be a coveted asset at the trade deadline. Like, I could see a 2nd-round pick for sure for Kerfoot, but if Utah was like 6 to 10 points out of the playoff spot, I would see that happening, but they're way too close, and I don't see Bill Armstrong disrupting the room by selling Kerfoot and grabbing an asset. It would just send the wrong message to the locker room. For Maccelli, he's 24 years old, 2 years, $3.5 million per year. He had 17 goals, 57 points last season. He was unbelievable, and then this season, it's just not there for him consistently up front. Bill Armstrong has said publicly, well, not publicly, someone is leaking it out, that Bill Armstrong's concerns right now with the roster is a forward group and their size. He doesn't say size in terms of physical, literal size as height and weight, or does he mean the type of style they play, that size, cactus-like hockey he always boasts about? Right now, they're a bit too small as people are leaking to the media, so they're looking for size up front, which is why a lot of these players are over 6 feet tall. Here are the draft picks. This is my favorite format of looking at the draft picks for Utah. They have pretty much only 1 pick for each round next draft, which is in a couple months in July. They're just missing a 7th round pick, but next offseason, So a year from now, in a couple months, that draft, they have 3 second rounders, 2 third rounders. So what are you going to do with those 3 second rounders? Are you going to use one for this year? Are you going to keep them for next season's playoff push where you could trade 2 second rounders for a pretty good player? We saw a trade like that in the summer where they traded 2 seconds for Marino. So you could get a great quality player under contract for second round picks. And then 2027, not too much either, just doubling up on fourth round picks. So you got to pay attention to these 3 second rounders. For me, I would not use one of them this playoff push. Definitely next year's playoff push is when I want to see them use it, because my MO is to not use your first round picks for rentals until you're a consistent playoff team. We've seen a cautionary tale with the Ottawa Senators where they kept trading first round picks, yet they haven't made the playoffs in those seasons of making those trades. I mean, the Coyotes were the beneficiary of one of those trades. They traded a first for Chychrun, and now a year later he's gone and he's in Washington. They did the same with DeBrincat as well. Played for Ottawa for like 1 season, requested a trade, now he's on Detroit. So you don't want to trade your first round picks. So I like the position Utah is in with a lot of second round picks. I'm comfortable with trading those around and playing with them. If they decide to use one of them this year for this playoff push, sure, I'd have to see and analyze if it's a good trade or not, but my gut is saying probably keep it for next year's push. But I agree, this year, the playoff push, Vancouver, Calgary, St. Louis, and Utah. I mean, Calgary's lost about 9 of 12 games. They're on a tough 6-game road trip. They were shut out back-to-back games. Vancouver, it's just dysfunction after dysfunction, and now maybe Quinn Hughes is injured, and St. Louis is expected to be sellers. So I'm not even worried about St. Louis, because come Friday their roster should be worse than it is now. And Utah, they're fully healthy, they're playing some pretty good hockey. It seems like they've unlocked that next gear and they're playing their best hockey of this season. So I agree, it's tempting. And if they do make a push, like a second round pick trade for a great player, that could elevate them to be that team that breaks out of those 4 or 5 teams I've mentioned. Bukestad, they traded Bukestad away 2 years ago at the trade deadline for a third round pick and Michael Kesselring. So that was a huge, unbelievable positive trade by Bill Armstrong. I don't expect that type of trade this year. He's now 2 years older at 32. 2 years ago, he had 13 goals, 23 points. This season, Bukestad has 5 goals, 15 points. So a slight decrease, but again, a big body centerman that could play down your lineup and take a roster spot from a young, inexperienced player. When you go in the playoffs, you want experienced players. These playoff teams do. So like the top 3 teams in the division, if they have a young player playing in their fourth line, they usually would sub them out for a veteran player for a playoff push and a deep push into the playoffs. When I talk about trading draft picks, like trading a third round pick, getting a third round pick, maybe trading a fourth, some examples of the quality of these picks. So Utah's third round picks currently yet to play in the NHL are Vasanen, Nord, Lavoie, Castagna, and Moroz. Fourth round picks, you got guys like Goldsmith, Gabe Smith, and Bieber in Sweden. Fifth round picks, you got a great prospect in Kipke. You got Allard and great goaltending in Thielen in Sweden. So you can't just scoff at a fifth round pick, because with this organization, this scouting staff, this drafting staff, they could get a guy like Justin Kipke, who's unbelievable, and I'm so high on him in the prospect pipeline. He's a fifth round pick. So are you going to trade a fifth round pick and you might get a guy like Kipke? Is that worth it to you? I think so. I think, third, fourth, fifth round picks you can kind of play around. But again, the other side of it is you got great scouts that could pick up some really underrated players in those rounds. So let's go to the meat of the video, the targets. Who should they acquire? So for me, I targeted basement teams totally out of the playoff spots that are going to sell. Most of them are unrestricted free agents. Only a few of them have an extra year tagged onto them. We'll start with Jordan Greenway in Buffalo. A bit of a down year. He missed 30 games to an injury. I love this guy on Minnesota. Haven't really kept up with him in Buffalo, but seems like he's not producing well. But 6'6", 230 pounds. Sure, a lot of these guys aren't going to blow you away with goals, but really, do we need more goal scoring? Just, I would say a little bit, but we can't really afford a top 6 player at this trade deadline. It would cost too many assets. And again, in the position Utah is in, it's a pretty big gamble to do. Next year, for sure, we can start seeing that. But Greenway, $3 million. The money doesn't really matter for Utah. They got all the cap space in the world. And by now, most of those salaries are like 75% paid off already. Then Jason Zucker, probably the odd man out here on this list. I only put him here because he has history with the team. Last year, he was with the team for about 55 games. So he knows the system, knows the coaches, knows the players as well. The players liked him during his time in Arizona. He's playing much better than last year. He has 18 goals this year, whereas I think last year he only had 9 goals at the trade deadline. So we traded him for a 6th round pick last year. We traded him away for a 6, which was a brutal trade by the organization, but they were handcuffed with money and ownership issues. So that's why they only got a 6. I don't expect Zucker to go for a 6th round this time around. Like I said, he doubled up his goal totals, and so he could go for a 3rd round pick. If Utah trades a third for Zucker, they're familiar with him. They know what he brings. He's already familiar with the system. That could be a great, sort of sidestep trade, and he could fill in that spot next to Gunther and Hayden. He's played with Gunther for 50 games already last season. So that's the reason why he's on the board, not saying I want them to go get Jason Zucker. I was pretty disappointed by him last season, if people are watching from last season. Then we have McLeod, 6'3", 187 pounds. Again, from Buffalo, but he went on a deep run with Edmonton last season, down to the finals, down at game number 7. So you're bringing in that playoff experience right there. Another depth guy. For me, when you look at these players, you're thinking, and my thinking is, are they better than O'Brien and Carcone in the lineup? If the answer is yes, then you should acquire that player. Like for me, down the stretch, O'Brien shouldn't be playing much. The only reason why he's playing is because Carcone is injured, and Michelli, it seems like he's just in the doghouse, but yet it's pretty much his own fault. He's not producing at the level, and he doesn't bring that size and forecheck that they need up front with the forward group. Then Nico Sturm, a long-term San Jose Shark and Minnesota Wild player, 6'3", 209 pounds, $2 million. He only has 12 points this year. He's 29 years old. McLeod was 25 and Greenway 28 years old. Klim Kostin, not really jumping out the page with point totals, but huge big body guy, 6'4", plays a heavy game, 231 pounds, but he was drafted by St. Louis. So Bill Armstrong was part of that organization when they drafted. Maybe he was the one who pushed hard for Kostin, considering how big he is and how much of a size queen Bill Armstrong is. So maybe Bill Armstrong wants to go back to the well with Klim Kostin. Is Kostin better than O'Brien in the lineup? Most likely, but I agree that O'Brien has that fan flair, fan favorite, hyping up the crowd at the Delta Center that Kostin won't bring. Then Gunstrom from San Jose, I loved him in LA. Not sure what's going on with him lately. Has he been injured? 39 games played, only 7 points, really low, but he has familiarity with Sean Dursey and Olimata playing for LA. That could be a great pickup. Is Gunstrom better than Carcone and O'Brien? I would say yes, even though Carcone scored 20 goals last season. We got Jankowski from Nashville, 6'4", 212 pounds for him. He's been dealing with injuries, missing 20 games this year. Colton Sissons, a long-time Nashville Predator. I mean, having Sissons in your lineup as depth, as a veteran player, I would love that over a guy like Carcone and O'Brien. You also got to consider if they do trade away Bukestad, they got to replace him because there's no one really who's going to replace him right now on Utah. You got to put Michelli in, but Bukestad plays that fourth line role with a big body presence that Michelli really doesn't bring. And Michelli needs to be in your top six. Not a good fit on the fourth line. So if you sell off Bukestad, you got to bring another guy in. And any of these players I would love, well, except Zucker, but these could be your bottom six players replacements for Nick Bukestad. I think the best player here is Brandon Tanev at Seattle. I think he's probably the most expensive as well, but he's had a couple down years with Seattle. He only has 17 points in 58 games played this year, but he plays like a dog. He plays that Bill Armstrong hockey that Bill Armstrong wants. Even though he's only 6 feet tall, he plays that big, sizable hockey that Bill Armstrong is craving for in his forward group. He'd be a great pickup, but again, a little bit expensive. Maybe they use next year's second round pick, one of the three, to acquire him. And then Boston, they got a couple young, not young, 27 years old, both of them, but some newish players that are uncommon to the mainstream, some bottom six big players, play the right way, play hard, play physical in Trent Frederic and Brazeau. And then just today, the Rangers have scratched Riley Smith to protect him from, getting injured leading up to the trade deadline. I'm pretty sure Bill Armstrong invented that, healthy scratching players just to protect them. He did that a lot with Jacob Chikrin 2 years ago. But Riley Smith, he's a goal scorer, doesn't play that big style hockey, but he's defensively sound. He could score goals. He was on the Vegas Golden Knights for years and years, playing so much playoff hockey, finally winning the cup with Vegas. Yeah, that's right. He was traded right after that cup victory, but bringing in that experience with Vegas, I loved him on Vegas. He kind of lost his step with Pittsburgh and the Rangers the past 2 seasons, but to add him there with Gunther and Hayden in place of Carcone, that's a huge upgrade. He hasn't been playing too well, 29 points, 10 goals. I don't think he warrants a first round pick, maybe a second. Maybe you get away with going to the Rangers and be like, hey, we'll give you a young Finnish player like Michelli to replace Capo Kakko, who they traded away earlier in the season. They could do a 1-for-1. We'll give you Michelli for Smith. Michelli's not even playing for Utah. They're playing good without Michelli, and so you inject Riley Smith into that lineup. That would be a great business move and a great injection of goal scoring and some veteran presence for Utah that could maybe elevate them out of those 4 or 5 teams battling for the playoff spots. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. Who do you want? Who are you looking at? Maybe you got a guy that you're eyeing that's not even on this target board. But for me, this is generally my feelings heading into the trade deadline. What are your feelings heading into the trade deadline Friday? So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, spread the word. And as always, thank you for your support.